Okay. Thank you, Pablo Martinez, for dealing with all the technical issues. Thank you so much. So we're now going to give the floor to Ramina, as I was saying. We don't want to waste any more time. So let's go ahead with this first connection between the theory and the practice, and then we'll move on to the questions. Ramina, go ahead. Well, good morning or good afternoon to all of you. My name is Ramina Reba. I am a researcher from the Praxis Institute, and I am sharing the directorship of the Masters together with Pablo Costamagna. My idea was that based on some of your contributions in the forum, we could retrieve an idea about innovation in the public sphere. In the base document that I sent you, I gave you a bit of a guideline with not so much a formula, but more what concepts we should be taking into account in this open concept of innovation. We have to think of it as a way of finding new elements, new results, of recombining existing elements, and a way of changing what we used to do traditionally in public management, and also the search to find open solutions. So the idea is that although some innovation drives transformation and institutionalizes certain practices, the complexity and the uncertainty that has been introduced in this last year has shown to us that innovation is a true challenge for managers, for leaders, and for everyone working in local governance at all levels of public administration, but of course, especially at the territorial level, which is what we're focusing on now. So that gave us a sort of framework or formula of an idea. And based on that idea, we have to address what is the public issue and what social public satisfaction, what degree of social public satisfaction do we need to guarantee? And based on that, we established a certain series of initiatives to drive it towards practice. And we also need to measure the impact, the transformative impact that these innovations might have. We need to ensure that innovation is open and that it mobilizes certain players at a territorial level, not just the governments, but other players, other actors that also are involved in territorial actions, and also to acknowledge their role towards the contribution in this practical transformation. And we've already, I'm sure you've talked about this in previous units, previous sessions. It all comes down to governance, which what we have called in the document as mobilization of actors. You may also have heard someone refer to it as dialogue or dialogue spaces, but ultimately those are the elements that foster open innovation. There were 3 very interesting contributions and they had some questions, but I'm going to try and discuss all 3 of them and raise some questions to give you the chance to take part, to share your experiences, because the opportunity to innovate lies with all of us. But what we have to do is to discover it, to find the intention and the motivation, and understand the capabilities that we have individually and as a group in order to put all of this into motion. And there are also possibilities through training processes, through dialogues to co-construct new capabilities. Please let me know if I'm speaking too quickly. Pablo knows that I can get a bit carried away. It's all good. We'll let you know if you need to calm down. Thank you. So far, so good, Romina. But if any of the students, I think we're all friends now, so if anyone wants to mention anything, please do. Octavi was talking about the association of metropolis and large cities. we want to make sure that you see these conceptual terms from a practical point of view. And that's really the best thing that we can possibly do, that when we think about innovative processes. Octavio said that they had a series of objectives linked to how these territories should be structured, and he really highlighted the importance of training and financial resources in funding some of these processes. Now, that really is very important when it comes to innovation, and it says so in our document. And he also said that there is a need to address a whole series of very complex issues. And he also mentioned something which we believe is very important in territorial development, which is the multidiscipline degree, the multidiscipline approach that we need when addressing complex issues like these. And he also highlighted another point which I think is vital in decision-making processes, which was data and having information and having the right training processes in order to make the right decisions. He shared his experience about how certain sectors have been mobilized, and that is the ultimate goal, to mobilize all of the players who can contribute to innovation in a territory, to metropolitan management. I think Octavi can also, of course, add to this now. And he also talked about the fact that there is a process and the need to define the roles within that process, to link politicians to the people with the technical expertise. And that is something that's been coming up throughout the whole course. And it really would be very interesting to explore that a bit more in depth. If we have more technical expertise, then how can we relate to the political leaders? How can we work with them? And how are we linked, as I was saying? So I'm going to raise a first question, which is general. I think it covers all three of the experiences. And that is, who has to undertake the role of mobilizing players involved in innovation? Of course, there may be a lot of people who can do this, but that's the question I want to raise because I know that we've been working on this concept and it's important. Regarding what Javier said, and I'd just like to say hello to Javier because we already know each other from previous congresses and experiences that we've shared. Javier talked about the governance school in San Jose in Uruguay, and he talked about the fact that the goal of this school is to activate social participation on a proactive basis. And he also said that based on training, that through training, they intend to mobilize players in all different spheres, the public sphere, private sphere, using social organizations as well. So this governance school has a very powerful role in training with the goal of defining the roles of the local and regional leaders. And here, what I think is most interesting is what is linked to the challenges he faced in this process, in this governance school. And what I want to ask you is, how is this training process linked to the political process? So how is the educational practice carried out at this school linked to policies, linked to the political side of it at a regional and local level there in Uruguay? And then lastly, Martin, who is also from Argentina like myself, talked about the experience of the Agri-Food Association in Regina. And from what he mentioned in his descriptions, there's a lot of work has been going on in the region revolving around agri-food. And what he's tried to do is map all the range of players and actors who are involved in this project. He also said that they have a rather broad objective because it is a multidisciplinary project, but it's all focused towards agri-food development. But of course, it also includes factors such as quality of life and other social aspects that are linked to this experience. So my question in relation to this is going back to the issue of technical guidance that he mentioned, it raises a bit of a problem on how to structure this regionally within Argentina. Now, I'm not sure if I've really understood this correctly. Martin can confirm this. But the question, as I was saying, that this raises, because of all the mapping they've been carrying out, is what role do the producers or beneficiaries play in this space? How do they talk to these players who are an absolutely vital part in the production and in the training process? So focusing about on this agri-food issue, but of course this applies to other fields too. So that's the main feedback that I want to give you, and it's the three questions that I wanted to raise. And then after that, perhaps we could start by inviting people to answer these questions. And if anyone can share further experiences, that would be wonderful. Yep, that would be the idea. If Javier, Martin, Octavi can share their responses to your feedback just now, and then the rest of the group, I think, could also be invited to share their reactions to what you've said or share their own experiences in different projects. So let's start by opening the floor to answer these questions. Who'd like to go first? They're all been taking part quite actively. Well, I'm happy to start because I was the first to be mentioned by Romina. Good afternoon from Barcelona in Spain. The experience that I was talking about is not really applied to a specific territory, but it rose from a claim that the members of our network have made. And they said, give us the perfect metropolitan governance model. And we said, well, there is no perfect model. It's not, you send it home like an IKEA piece of furniture and you build it. But of course, it is based on a whole series of things. We have to give you a series of tools and elements, and you put them together according to your process. So the problem that they raised was that they have started to question the traditional model of power, of relationships of power, because all of these players are now reconsidering their role and trying to reinvent themselves on an ongoing basis. They're constantly questioning whatever is being done. And I was referring more to the example of public administration, people who have been chosen to govern as politicians, and also the technicians on the other side, because their model, their role, their structure has changed somewhat. And we have the impression that in public administration, they don't have the elements they really need to establish regulations and to achieve this holistic point of view so that they can really work with all of the players, not from a point of view of power, but of construction. Yes, I'd like to add here something, let's say in brackets, on a side note, about these structures of hegemonic power. And construction relations are also power relations, ultimately. So, of course, there will be asymmetries in these relationships due to institutional structures, due to personal capabilities, or to group capabilities as well in the organizations. So it's important to understand that there will be these disparities when we approach construction. So this perfect idea of achieving consensus in the most liberal sense, I think is a bit of an ideal. What we have to do is to try and experiment. We have to do this in co-governance, of course, try and through trial and error learn together and build this space for debate. And that will drive us towards construction, not only from a hegemonic point of view, but also including the voice of new players who formerly were not. on the theme. I think it's a very interesting idea. I was trained in sciences and political sciences, so of course that's why I say that everything is based on power. But construction itself will also involve conflicts. And what we have to do is try to reach the basic agreements that we can to collaborate. That will be the healthiest approach rather than thinking of things purely as processes and results. That's why I think all of these contributions are so important because we can learn from the practical experiences. We can experience this trial and error and try to improve, perhaps take a step backwards when we have to, if things are not working out. And there's one contribution I would like to make linked to Unit 1, because I can clearly see that this is related. We were talking about governance in Unit 1, and something similar is happening now, which is that we must never overlook the fact that within this whole complex relationship between theory and practice, that we always have to work based on specific problems, problems that people have. All anything to do with innovation, governance must ultimately be addressed with the aim of solving a problem. We need to understand what problem we are dealing with. So in metropolitan Barcelona, things will be different to San Jose as they will to somewhere in Morocco or in Nigeria. But understanding the specific problem really puts our feet on the ground. It brings us down to earth and it positions us in where we need to be between theory and practice. And that already came up in Unit 1, and I just wanted to remember it now. So who would like to carry on? Thank you so much, Octavi. Javi has raised his hand.
Buenas, Dahian Romina,
Yes, hello everyone, Romina and everyone else.
¿todo bien?
I hope everything is well.
Bueno, un poco explicar el proceso de la Escuela de
I
Gobernanza
wanted
en San
to
José.
explain the process of this
Yo tengo
governance
también
school in San Jose.
parte de la deformación de
I
Romina, que
also
tiene
have
la misma
a
formación
similar
profesional que
problem as Romina because I was also involved in political sciences
actividad
and
política
I
siempre,
still
conozco
work
el sistema político local.
in the political
Entonces,
system at a local level.
veo la construcción de estos
So I
procesos
also
como
see
un
things
proceso
from a similar point of view as Romina. These
de
processes
lucha por el poder.
are some, let's say, a battle
Que
for
lo que
power is
genera
always
tensión
involved in them.
permanente en la
And there
construcción
seems to
de
be
procesos
permanent
territoriales.
tension in
¿Cómo se
territorial
construye
processes.
esa lucha de poder?
So, how
Y
this
bueno,
battle plays
la
out
construcción que podemos hacer en el
and the
territorio
construction
para
we
el
can
proceso.
achieve will
Y
depend on
justamente
these relationships of power
en
and
el
so on.
periodo pasado de la administración, nosotros
And recently, in our last
avanzamos un poco. En
administration,
Uruguay
just to give you a bit of context,
noviembre
in
recién
Uruguay on the
tuvimos
27th of
un
November, so very recently,
un
we
relevo
had
de gobiernos
a
locales,
change of local
tanto en los
governments
municipios como en los
at a
departamentos.
municipal level and at a, let's say, department level, where new
En
authorities
la
came in.
administración anterior se conformó este
In the
espacio
previous
de la
administration, we
gobernanza
defined
que
this
vino a romper con la
governance
lógica
school,
de distribución del poder
which managed to
bastante
break with the
horizontalista
previous very vertical
siempre muy
logic
acostumbrado
of
a la
governance.
toma de decisiones
Because we were
por
used to
parte
decisions
horizontal,
being made on a
pero
very
básicamente el
vertical
Ejecutivo
basis,
manda y
where the
el
people
resto
at the top of the power gave the orders and everyone else
departamental
further
describía
down in the departmental structure
las asociaciones
just
civiles,
followed those
las
orders.
sociedades
And
civiles
that included all of the
los diferentes
associations
sectores
and
que se
organizations
relacionan con el
that
gobierno local, también bajo una
interact with the
lógica
local
de si la
government.
intendencia dijo, pum, se va
So it was all a very top
de
downwards
de
approach
poder, ¿no?
in terms
Entonces,
of power.
la escuela de gobernanza fue como el
So
primer
this
paso
governance school was,
hacia
let's say, a
la
first
definición
step
de cambio de
forward
lógica
in
de
changing
esa
this
distribución del
paradigm,
poder.
in
Obviamente,
changing the distribution of power.
es un proceso
Now we
que va a llevar
understand that
muchísimo
this is a
tiempo,
process that's going to
es un
take a very
proceso a
long
largo
time.
plazo,
It's a
y
long-term
personalmente
process.
creíamos que teníamos que
And we
comenzar
thought we should
con un
start
proceso de formación
with a
en dos
training
niveles.
process
Uno, un
on two
proceso de
levels.
formación interna dentro del
Firstly,
propio gobierno
internally
departamental,
within the
donde los propios
regional
funcionarios de la
governance,
Intendencia
where
también
the
asuman
civil servants who work there
la distribución
can
del poder
take on their responsibility within the distribution of power and understand that it has to be more horizontal. And to achieve that, each civil servant has to get engaged in the decision making process and take on their responsibility. And the second level of training was to do with the more intermediate levels of power and the regional legislators, the lawmakers. So we also started to implement training there, and it was about leadership, governance, territorial development. They were the main themes around which the training revolved. And the ultimate goal in this training was not just to provide academic knowledge, but to get people interacting and fostering a debate between different players who otherwise would never have spoken to one another. And of course, that had the goal of building trust, building trustworthiness and stronger relations within our territory. That was very successful. Fortunately, we saw some very positive outcomes. People were very keen to get involved. All of the political players, everyone from different political parties was happy to take part. And we think it marked a turning point. Can I interrupt you, Javier, just to ask you a question? Yes, go ahead, Pablo. How did this work out? Was there a good coexistence within the school? And this has come up in several webinars. The coexistence between technical sides and political sides. So people who are working in the offices or people who have these political roles of power. There's also always tension between them. Was this governance school for politicians? Was it for technical people, which I consider would be technical politicians? So what I'm asking is, what was the relationship between all these players? Well, basically, these training initiatives targeted both technicians and politicians. And in that space, we had to build channels so that these two worlds could connect, because usually they run in parallel. Technicians think that politicians just make decisions based on their own interests, which are electoral interests, and they think that that's all that defines the political decisions. But that's not always true because technical decisions are not always then implemented by the politicians. So what we really needed to do was get these two different sides talking, and that was the most enriching outcome of the first few steps that we took. And then what we did was broaden the scope a little bit to target civil servants in the regional government who are more involved, less in the technical side, in more and more in the operational enforcement of the decisions, and also civil society. We started to include different players in the debate. And no doubt this proved really fruitful, getting all these people together to talk, these players who are usually completely isolated and separated from one another. And within this group of politicians, the added bonus was that we also had people from the opposition. That was fundamental because sometimes the technicians thought we were the bad guys, let's say, because we're the ones who are always demanding additional reports and we're always asking for more information. But that's our role. In the Constitution of the Republic, what we have to try and do is question what the government is doing. So we had to try and prevent the hostility between the different parties and understand what role everyone has to play in the process. Now, that for us involved great progress. Then we also implemented actions such as the childhood program, and we We replicated that program, which began in the south of Spain. We replicated it here. It was, of course, a participative project in which to foster democracy, about citizenship. We also were involved in a business project as well to reach a consensus. And there were other actions linked to citizen participation in recovering the local identity of different areas. And now, in this new process that is beginning with the new administration, the governance school is going to take yet another step in an institutional level. It's going to become a specific program within the government with its very own budget, with its very own defined institutionality. And then the whole debate that's going on now in San Jose is whether the opposition, which now is us at the moment, should take part in the steering committee of this. And that's a decision that's being made right now as we speak. And we think it would be healthy, of course, to include the opposition in these processes. But we're, as I say, taking one step further towards the institutionalization of our program. And in terms of training and citizen participation, we're also going to add a new component about statistics so that we can work on drawing up public policies based on factual data. And that's what's coming up in the near future. So we will drive training, citizen participation, and then this new added line for our school, which will be statistics, so that we can define public policies based on statistics. I think there again, there will be some tension between technicians and politicians. So the school really needs to make further progress on the technical side, let's say, in training technicians and ensuring that they can really get involved in drawing up public policies. And then it is the politicians who make the decisions, but it should be based on hard facts, which is why we're going to try and develop this statistical area within our department, which doesn't exist at the moment. So I have a question, Javier, in terms of the training. In this training, in the education, do you tackle a definition of the practical problems that you have? Do you try to work on specific problems and their definition? Yes, all of the programs that we work on are based on specific issues. And Pablo is a teacher on our program. They're all based on real experiences, real problems that the students identify in our region. And right now in San Jose, starting on the 8th of January, there will be a roundtable about public policies, which stemmed from an idea by a working group, which was driven by one of our first graduates from our courses. So what they do is they define a proposal, they bring people together, they listen to each of the different players who take part, and then that actually becomes politics, that it ultimately turns into policies. Well, before giving the floor to Patricia, who raised her hand, I just want to mention something linked to what Pablo was saying about the relationship between technicians and politicians. For me, this is a purely political relationship because technicians can put forward their expertise, their specific know-how when tackling specific problems, but they need to also have certain awareness of the lawmaking, of political processes, and of the importance of opening up the debate to other people and other fields of knowledge, not only technicians, not only scientists. And I think that's a challenge for those of us who have a more technical background. It, the problem is knowing how we can interact with other players how to do that, because ultimately that helps us to act as facilitators, inviting other people to take part in the decision making process. This is something we really need to learn how to improve. Those of us who are technicians, when we speak to political leaders and when we share our ideas, we need to understand the importance of listening to others. So I think that that's a vital combination to make sure that we have complex solutions to complex problems. It's important to be able to experiment, to try an idea, to see whether it works. There are innovation laboratories as well in certain territories. There are universities who are also working on specific initiatives, such as Rosario in Argentina, and Ritos works in one of the research institutes, but also the governments can encourage this by launching small work groups, helping us also to understand how much technical knowledge do we need and how much political understanding do we need so we get the right balance in the recipe. Of course, these are complex situations, complex scenarios, and that we don't have isolated roles. We need them to work together and we need to learn from one another. And in this sense, I think the state, the government, the national government also plays a very important role, as do local and regional governments in this context. The states, the different regions have a lot to say in this because they have a democratic space that is established and they have the hegemonic ability. But in order to innovate in certain territories, depending on the municipal competencies, they're going to need some independence, some power to make decisions. If they think security is an issue that needs to be addressed because the citizens say that it is, even if it isn't my competency as a regional leader, I need to be able to do it. And I'm going to give you a very nice example about local democracy, because it's really very interesting when talking about independence and the capacity to make decisions locally. And I also think that the states have often undertaken this power that they have to shake up other actors, to encourage them to get moving. A lot of local governments have this open minded initiative, and even when they don't, I think the scenarios, the forums that are being used to understand the relationships of power should be more horizontal so that we can really solve problems. This is something that we really need to work on. And I'm going to share this experience later if we have time about a local government that we've been working with, and they had never thought of getting other players involved. And then there's also strategic capability. It could be the vision of a series of political leaders because they have a specific political project behind them. They would define a series of objectives for their government, but they also need to handle day to day issues, urgent, pressing issues that come up. And they need not to lose that strategic capability when something urgent arises. And in this regard, we need to be able to balance different issues. So it's more than just the strategic agenda that they define at the beginning, because new issues are going to arise. And that, of course, calls for dialogue with other actors, with other players. And here it's really important to reconsider our role as technicians in this facilitation and mediation process. And we need to understand that in order to innovate in our current context, especially now in 2020, after 9 months of turmoil, some people have been in this context of pandemic for even longer. We really need to be ambidextrous. We need to know that there will be times when we have to make short-term decisions, immediate decisions, and we may make mistakes. And then there are other times where the decisions are more mid or long term, and we need to engage different players at every stage of the process. We need not to lose sight of our strategic vision in any of these decisions, because the ultimate goal of these strategies is to improve the quality of life of people who live in the territory that we are working for. When it comes to managing territories, we need to not lose sight of our ability to innovate. If we lose the will to be critical of our own work, and if we lose sight of the will to achieve things and to make progress, then our mission will fail. Sometimes we need to understand that we'll have to go back on ourselves and make improvements. It's not just about technological change, and that is often what people think innovation is all about. Sometimes it's just about tiny, tiny processes where we change people's attitudes, behaviors, and that helps to trigger a whole series of more complex innovations, even at a technological level or even in terms of open government and other concepts like that. These are 2 points that I thought were very important to mention. And in terms of the training that each of you have, it's important to lay this on the table as well. So, Patricia, and then I think Martin have the floor.
Hola, ¿cómo están?
Hello, how are you?
Aquí desde Buenos Aires.
I'm saying hello to you all from Buenos Aires in Argentina.
Charló anteriormente, yo comenté un poquito el primer día
I already
en
mentioned
el área de
the first
planificación
day that I
estratégica.
work in
Y
strategic
la
planning here in this
particularidad
city.
que tiene en relación a esto que estamos
And the
hablando es que
particularity that we
actualmente
have, the
nosotros constituimos
specificity,
hace unos
is
cuantos
that
años
several
un
years ago
consejo de
we
planificación corporativa
constituted a
y ese
strategic planning
se viene
council
convocando a organizaciones
where what we do
sociales
is reach
en
out to
diferentes
civil society
ámbitos,
organizations
no
in the
solamente
broadest
se
possible
piensa en
sense.
fundaciones, partidos
So,
políticos,
not just
sino aquellos
foundations,
fundados
political
autónomos
parties, trade
que quieran
unions,
sumarse,
anyone
digamos,
who
desde un
wants
lugar
to
sí
take part
institucional y con una perspectiva, digamos, la que piense
with an
incluir a
institutional
todos,
approach
pero la
and with
población
the
toda,
will
no
to
digamos
include
elititas como tenemos
the
nosotros.
whole
Y
of
un poco lo que yo
citizenship,
quería
not
contar
just
hacer
in
en el
specific
día de hoy,
regions.
justamente viene muy en
And
línea
what I
con
wanted
lo
to
que
share
hicimos dos
now
aportes, digamos,
has a lot to do with the
contribuciones con
contributions
Romina
that
y con
Romina
Javier,
has just been
con
making,
Javier,
and
que
also
tiene que
Javier.
ver con que aún en los casos como el nuestro, en que muy
In cases
entretenidamente
like
discutimos lo que
ours,
hemos
where
resuelto, es decir,
we
gestionar la articulación de
have
los equipos técnicos y los
perhaps
políticos para poder
defined this
presentar algo para
relationship
mostrar
between technicians and
la
politicians
realidad
better than
económica,
others have,
hay que trabajar
although, of
juntos.
course, there is
¿Sí?
always
Y hace más de
a
2
line
años
that
que se
separates them,
viene
but we need
pensando
to work
juntos, digamos, la
together.
ciudad
So
más del
it's
mediano
we've
plazo.
had 10 years of working
Otro
together and
desafío
sharing
que
ideas.
estamos teniendo nosotros ya
And one of the challenges that
tiene
we've
que ver
faced
ya
now
no con el hecho de cómo
is
sumar
to
a los
do not
actores,
only with
digamos,
how to
sino
get
cómo
all of these different
mantenerlos
players
a
on
todos
board, but how to
involucrados, qué
keep them on
incentivos
board. What
qué
incentives
es lo que
can we
puede estar
use?
fallando desde
What
la
might be failing? What might be
planificación,
going wrong somewhere in our planning and in our
en la
structure
forma de sumar
if these players fail
digamos,
to remain
dejar por un
engaged?
lado, obviamente, la urgencia,
Because,
que es lo que
of course,
siempre
there are
está,
urgent and more
de
pressing
motivar
issues, as
a
Ramina was
las
saying, that
organizaciones a que la gente se
usually
sume,
encourage
digamos,
people
pero
to
por
get
otro
involved
lado,
in the
uno
first
desde
place.
la planificación ve que
But
esto para que
then what we
pueda
see
realmente llevar a un
from the planning
resultado
point of view is that in
requiere
order to achieve real
muchísimo tiempo,
results, this
mucha
has to
paciencia,
continue over
y uno
time.
por ahí elige temas,
So
como vos
we put
mencionabas
together
recién,
roundtables,
de
we
seguridad,
choose
digamos, que
topics that
traen
might be interesting, for example, security,
muchos
as someone
actores,
mentioned earlier.
digamos,
We
una
get a lot of
perspectiva
people
y
together and
a
sit them
trabajar en
down at the
ejercicio
table
con miradas
to try and solve
distintas,
problems
con
from their different
distintos
points of
ángulos,
view,
convergen posiciones
each with their
políticas
different
para
contributions, and often
resolver
they are
problemas que
very
están
contradictory
dentro, digamos,
perspectives. So
de seguridad.
it can be quite an intense debate,
Pero
especially
cuando
in a
empieza
topic
ese
like
proceso,
security.
bueno,
But
uno va
when this
perdiendo
process
ese
begins, we
interlocutor.
find that
En
people
lo
start to
próximo,
drop
uno
out
siempre
on the way.
tiene,
They lose
empieza a
interest,
pensar, bueno, ¿dónde está el tema? Digamos,
and we
donde se
wonder
debería estar ir,
what's
que es
going
donde
wrong.
antes, y que está en el texto, de la importancia de
This was
sostener al
mentioned in the
máximo
text. It's really
la
very
permanencia
important
como
to
puedan recurrir.
have this
Puede
more
ser también una
permanent, more long
desafío que
term
pueda
space.
representar a varios
It may be an issue of representation because some people may represent various different sectors. But the issue is that we may not be giving an answer to the most immediate issues. So it's not just about laying the table and getting people to sit there together. It's about them wanting to come back. It's about defining criteria of leadership. I think actually what I'm raising are more questions than contributions, but I really wanted to share my ideas. Because some people will fall out before the results arrive. They'll drop out along the way. And it's not just about us saying, this is what you need to do this because we have all the answers. That's not the approach that we need. So this is what I wanted to share. And just I want to open that. And I apologize that I haven't been able to add more written information because this is we're at the end of the year now and I have a lot of work to do. But hopefully now is the time. Yes, Patricia, for you and for others, for those of you who will be doing the activities of our various units over the next few weeks, we're going to have an opportunity to see what we can do with people like you who've joined us a bit later on in the process. We know it's the end of the year. We know it's difficult for everyone. So Romina, before I give the floor to someone else, I think because of what Javier and Octavi said, they've mentioned the need, the real importance of gathering data to ensure that technicians can make decisions from a cross-sector point of view. You've been talking about complexity, multidisciplinarity, but basically what we need is to end this political power discourse. It's really interesting to see all of the experiences that you're sharing. We're going to have to set up a course, and I mean it, where politicians and technicians come together, where they really take part, where we can really learn openly from one another. It will be careful because it will be difficult, sorry, because we'll have to be careful to ensure that it's a healthy debate. We're going to have to provide the right training before this is done. But really, I think that's something that we could do. I wanted to mention it because the idea came up several times. And I think it would be very relevant. Go ahead, Romina. I'm sorry to steal your time. No, absolutely. I think Patricia raised a very interesting question, which we all come across, which is how to keep people engaged, how to keep people getting involved. When I was working with Miran and with Pablo about facilitators, this is what we discussed. We absolutely have to keep people involved. We have to keep people together and we have to ask ourselves, why are they dropping out? Why are they no longer interested? This is very interesting in Latin America as well in terms of the concept that we have of states, because there's always a sense that local governments need to take action. They need to be able to solve issues. We are working with small communities of about 8,000 people. And the other day, someone in a meeting raised their hand and said, but let's do something. We have to take action. And I said, well, yes, but taking action means that you have to be part of that action. These are different topics, so I don't want to get things mixed up now, but some of the issues that we face happen because of the political strategies. Sometimes people want to just get on and do something because they can, but it seems like they only do it so that they can say, hey, look, you asked me to do this and I did it. We need political leaders to be involved in the dialogue. And I know I'm asking quite a lot because it's a difficult time for them, but it really is very important. The leader of the department that I'm talking about was at the meeting the other day, and she took a series of notes, and I said to her, you don't need to make many differences. You don't need to do different things because you already have the dialogues underway. You've already started this process. So we sometimes have to act as mediators in coordinating these discussions. From my experience here in Argentina, that's one of the shortfalls, and it's one of the jobs that local governments need to carry out. And I think participation is very important when there are lawmakers getting involved, when the opposition gets involved as well. We need to foster participation. We really need to make sure that everyone's voice is heard in these discussion forums. That's just my point of view from the experiences that I've been able to know about. Martin? Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I wasn't lucky in the last webinar where my sound failed. Can you hear me? Yes, good.
Antes de precisar en el tema del polo agroalimentario,
So before talking about the agri-food experience,
especialmente
I want to thank you, first of all, because after a very intense year of hard work, I felt a little bit lonely, and I'm going to tell you why. I come from the university academic field and also intermediate institutions. So I've been able to take part in a lot of workshops, a lot of gatherings, processes, programs, and I've always had to represent the University of Rio Negro. And in my role as a regional minister, a lot of the tasks of research and so on that have been going on at the university are things that I would have really liked to turn into ordinance, into local rules. And that's why this agri-food program stemmed from a strategic project, which was the Regina 2030 project. And the process of strategic development attempted to include the approach of all the different players in society so that they could define strategies together. And the way we achieved that in this strategic development project was very successful. And we defined a series of strategic lines for 2030, which have sadly been left stored in somebody's drawer. So a whole year of work to define a strategic project for the city of Regina for the future was sadly stalled. It came to a complete standstill because the person who had to raise it and take the next step failed to do so. And what I did was suggest that we retrieve this strategic project. I'm afraid Martin's sound again has failed us. Can you hear me now? Yes, we can. I was talking to Pablo about facilitators who came to the territory. We wanted to know how to develop this project in the year that we had ahead of us. And what we did was set up a council for strategic planning and development. But it wasn't working very successfully. People were not working the way they should, and it was quite a biased political program. It wasn't really true and faithful to the reality that we needed. So this strategic development and planning instrument was not very active. It was good in theory, but not in practice. And what we tried to do was define a new plan. And in this new plan, we defined three main pillars in which to drive strategic planning. The first pillar was the environmental, productive, and financial one. We tried to gather all of the information we had in Regina because it wasn't well structured. So based on this pillar, we included the voice of various different players to gather information about what's going on in this territory. The second pillar was urban and territorial. So we asked ourselves, what's going on in our city? Where do we want to head? What are the social realities? We tasked ourselves with dividing it into units and understanding their different problems. And then we had a third social community pillar. And we established an observatory in which to study social impact projects involving young people and any other aspects of social interest. So upon these three pillars, we added a cross-cutting one, which was an information and statistics center. So we needed some form of authority to gather real information, relevant information about how many producers there are, how many people are in each sector, what type of production do they do. And in urban territorial planning, we thought, which way is our city growing? How is the city developing? Because all of these issues were not finding a forum in which to be discussed. And that's why we decided that this council, this Planning and Development Council, was so important because it included all of the players in the territory, including politicians. And Pablo mentioned this very nicely in the previous webinar, because thanks to this new role that I now play, I've been able to drive these projects forward. Projects like internationalizing the city of Villa Regina. I have come from a background of foreign trade and so on. So I understand the importance of establishing relationships with different places around the world. And this year, Regina approved an internationalization project in order to include us in all of these networks of cities. There are all sorts of different networks, including cities that have similar problems. Cities that are port cities, cities that are exporters, and some of them are involved in activities that are detrimental to the environment. So it was really important for us to understand that the steps we need to take are not to be taken by a political party. They're not to be taken by a political power, but rather by a consensus with all of the different players and all of the different powers. And I took the lead here and tried to bring them all together to make them understand that this is their battle under their flag, and to understand that we need each other. We need the different political powers and the different forces to work together on a public policy that truly is useful for everyone, for all of the individuals. And this task led us to a plan that was unanimously approved, and that was the agri-food plan. It was about sustainable development, and all of the different players unanimously voted in favor. So these strategic projects that we had been working on, we thought we had to work with the political parties to ensure that they were able to continue over time. And I want to link this to what Pablo was saying. The political side of it is very important to me because I think, I'm pretty sure if I had tried to do this as an academic, I would simply have taken part in a webinar or in a seminar with institutional players, but it would have been very difficult for me to get closer to the territorial level of it.
Pero trabajando isoladamente,
I'm afraid the sound is failing again.
muy difícil lograr si no trabajamos en
It
forma
would have been very difficult to do all of this had we not been able to collaborate with all of the different associations and organizations, with the Chamber of Producers, a whole series of research centers that cover the whole of the country. We have customs authorities involved as well, but they were all working individually. They were all working on an isolated basis, but we needed them to work together. The main problem for us was that we didn't have the right associative and collaborative model.
Se pierde un poco, Martín.
I'm afraid we're losing the sound a little bit. So it was a very rich territory. This is a very enterprising city. And I think that what politics need to do is try to guide the process and support the process to foster open debate and collaborative discussions so that all of the different voices and players can really take part.
Bueno, Martín, gracias. Gracias
Well, Martín, thank you so much for your contribution.
La ecuación era técnicos más políticos, más una economía igual transformación. Yo creo que son algunas de las variables. Yo pondría.
These are some of the.
I think that those are some of the variables. I would say the quality of life and people and social aspects are very important too. Social inclusion will be another one. With this in mind, I do believe that there are some elements, some things that are still to be said. I think that every territory has possibilities to be innovative, and not very big innovation processes are needed in order to produce innovation. I believe that just approaching the idea that comes from a clear definition of the problem, with data, with dialogues, with those people who live the problem, and the participation of stakeholders, these can help to make a better approach of the problem. And I think this is a very good first step. And these first steps can be transformative from the very beginning, which lead us to more important changes. There's no magic spell, but I do believe that we learn how to reflect about what we have done and think about what we have been doing and try to translate it into practice, then I do believe that we can be productive. On the other side, I do believe that it is very important to keep generating this capacity of absorption, listening, learn from the others, and try to learn from them to keep doing our work. What I've been saying about data is very interesting, but I think that these needs to be combined with a political dialogue. And as Rita was saying, the mobilization of all the different stakeholders. I would like to thank you for having me here. I would like to say that I'm available in case that you want some more feedback from me, the forum stays open. I will be delighted to participate again. I hope that you can share all documents and videos and all the learnings that you can take from these chats. And I do believe that this is very interesting for our targets. Thank you very much, Rami. We have been talking to Paula during the last weeks. We would like to invite everyone to a meeting. Paula is passing on a flyer over the chat. We will exchange it later on through mail. Next year, as I was saying, is the World Forum of Local Social Development. This is a forum that has been taking place for a series of years. There will be some pre-sessions. The first one will take place next Thursday, 13 hour for Europe. Paula will pass on the flyer about this webinar. It will be in Spanish and in English. It will take place Thursday at 9. It will be an extra academic activity. I do believe it is going to be very interesting because we will work on developing energies. I think some people have left the last minute, so we will forward them the flight so they know about this. I would like to bring on another subject, which is very interesting, and I would like to say about this that the gender approach is absolutely necessary. It's very transformative. It is totally necessary. So we will see how we can include this new approach in our subjects. Well, if this has been all, we will be seeing each other in the future. Thanks to the interpreters and their help, which has been very useful as usual. To all the team, Pauli and everyone, see you the 21st Monday at the same time that we met today. Thank you all for being here. Goodbye.
Muchas gracias. Muy bueno.
Saludos.
Goodbye, everyone.
Chao, chao.
Un gusto. Gracias, Martín.
Adiós. Chao, Paula. Chao,
Adiós.
Pablo.
Gracias.
Adiós.
Chau, chau,
Chao a
chau.
todos.
Chao, chao. Muchísimas gracias.